Join us each week as Andrew, Ray, and others bring us in on one of their weekly phone conversations with an amazing agent. This is Little Oak Weekly. Welcome to a new week of Little Oak Weekly. Today we're doing an Ask Andrew Anything style episode. We reached out to our agents asking what topics we should chat about and questions they might have. So let's just jump right into it and give Andrew a call.
Good morning.
How's it going?
Awesome.
Super. Did you have a good weekend? Long weekend? Thanksgiving?
I had an amazing long weekend. I was in Shuswap with some friends and family, and we're on the lake, and we had an awesome time. It was exactly what I needed. I feel totally energized, and I'm super excited for our time together here, actually.
Yeah, we got some good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I know. I looked over the list, and I think it's there's a lot of valuable stuff there. So I'm excited to dig into it and do what I can to help out.
Perfect. I figured the first thing we'll just chat about real quick, Thanksgiving kind of makes sense for it, is Little Oak Cares. Some of our agents probably know what it is, some don't. So figured it might not be a bad time to just bring up what it is, why it is.
Yeah.
What does it do?
Yeah, totally. So a little bit of background, we introduced the concept of Little Oak Cares. It was actually right before COVID hit. I remember it was we announced it at the AGM of February 2020. And what it is and what it was intended to be is a internal fund, 100% funded by our agents, staff, and office, designed to help people who are either within our brokerage or directly related to our brokerage in times of need. Hence the term or the title Little Oak Cares. So that's what it is. It's a fund that's now been in existence for almost 2 years. When it first started, there was probably 4 or 5 people contributing to it regularly. Now I believe we have upwards of 20 or 25 people contributing to it between agents, staff members, and management and ownership. And the fund at any given time has thousands of dollars in it. And we've done some incredible things. I don't have the full list in front of me here, but I can say off memory, we recently helped out with Chantel Clausen's dad was involved in a really terrible accident. We were able to help out there. We've done some things where maybe not somebody directly in our brokerage, but they're like related or close friends with somebody in our brokerage. We've helped them out in times of tragedy with whether it be, care packages or some financial support. And so, yeah, it's this really neat fund that I had an idea for because I'd observed it in another company for a number of years. And what it did in that company was amazing in terms of, the good feels that come from stuff like that. And so we have that fully operational, ready to roll, ready to help people out. If you want to contribute to it, some people do it monthly, some people do it off of a deal. And it can be anything. It can be a few dollars, $10, $20, whatever, but it all adds up because there's a large group of people now who have bought into it. We have the ability to really positively impact people's lives in challenging times.
Yeah, that's awesome. Norina, right, is the one they should reach out to?
Norina is the one who oversees the fund. So if you have questions or are interested at all, Norina's the person to talk to. And yeah, she's your go-to. And then there's also, she could even put you in touch with, if you wanted to talk to particular people who have been giving to it, I'm sure she could put you in touch with some people to answer any questions. But like I said, there's really no limitation on how you can give. If you want to do a one-time thing or a regular monthly thing, or I know a number of our agents do, just like we have Children's Miracle Network and people give a portion or an amount off of every transaction. I know there's a number of agents who are doing that. And there's no, minimum or any kind of threshold. If you want to do $5, $10, $20, whatever, it all adds up. And I was actually surprised to know how much we had. Like we had a few $1,000s or more in the account most recently. So it all builds up and it goes to a great cause.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get into some real estate related stuff.
Yeah.
The first thing, it's funny, I wrote here that I'm assuming you have systems and checklists, but I thought about it this morning and realized that the reason I know that is just because I know you, but I assume you use systems and checklists in your business. Is that safe to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And it's evolved over time. Well, we'll get into. I'll let you ask your question. The way I do it and what I do has certainly evolved, and but I'll explain that here as we go through.
So at the first start of it was just, did you always? Was that something that you did from the beginning, or was it something you just learned as you grew?
No, not always. I mean, when you start, you don't know anything and you don't do anything. You just kind of react, right? So, but I adopted systems very early on because of the people I was surrounded by and the people I was learning from. I mean, I kind of just sucked in as much knowledge as I could from the pros of that era that I learned from. And I figured out pretty quickly that if you don't write things down, if you don't develop systems, then not only are you going to forget things, but the experience that you deliver to your customer or client is not going to be consistent if you don't understand how to develop some systems. It's just going to, the experience they have is going to be the byproduct then of how busy you are, whether or not you forgot something, and your stress and anxiety level at that time. The moment you put a system in place, you can, for the most part, erase all of those variables because now you're just more like a machine operating in repeat mode and you're not reliant on where your brain's at that week. Maybe you were sick. Maybe you had a stressful thing in your family for a period of months. And during that time, you forgot something. So I figured that out early on that, in order to deliver a consistent experience to clients, systems are very important.
Can you break down or give an example of one of the systems? I know you use, more than one, but is there one that you can kind of just break down as an idea of what it is and how you use it?
Yeah, so actually, I'll use the word checklists. I think that's a word that's come up,
Sure.
I believe, in your question. And so there's a difference between systems and checklists, I would say. And so checklists, I pulled some stuff up just for this call because as mundane as it sounds, if you don't have these checklists developed of everything that needs to happen within a transaction, then it's like one thing that's forgotten can lead to either a mountain of work or a problem, right? So it's as simple as this. I have something called an upcoming listing checklist where everything that we are aware of that needs doing is listed out here, and it's developed on an Excel document, but it talks about my LTSA, which is getting landowner transparency registry. Obviously, that was a new thing that I've added in recently. Terra Firma, I have a subscription with Terra Firma where I can pull title and title documents for a yearly fee. Web forms, obviously, preparing stuff in web forms. This is all my in preparation list, right? So I haven't necessarily listed the property, but if I know something's coming, this is what I'm working on in order to be prepared. I create a new folder in web forms, and then I create a new folder within my Google Drive, whether that person's a buyer or a seller. They go under their proper folder, they get their names on that, and then everything that pertains to what they're doing, I've got somewhere to start dumping that information, right? So that something's being kept track of in a digital folder. And then I've got photo shoot and video, organizing that, sign installation, ordering that for the right time, measurements if required, and then write up, like property write up, like the actual description, FinTrack stuff, property disclosure statement completed. So these are, again, I'm just reading directly from my list of things to do, but this ensures that there's never a moment where we get to, having a property for sale and we're going, oh crap, we didn't do this or we forgot that, because we're literally just going through this list every single time. And then I've got another new listing checklist that also goes through. Some of those things are repeat, but then some of those things are only relevant for after a new listing has gone to market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mentioned that the systems and checklists, a lot of it sort of came from the people that you were surrounded with as you started and got into the business. So what would you say to somebody who's, maybe newer, or maybe not newer, but just hasn't started building some sort of checklist or system? Where do they start?
Well, I mean, I just would go to, so first of all, listening to a podcast such as this helps. But, at the time when I was in that space, I mean, podcasts and things like that didn't exist. There was training via, the Buffini model, which I was involved in, where I certainly got some value from that. But then just go to the people around you in our office. Like in my era, the people that I went to for this, free and valuable advice, or many of whom are still with us today, Larry Siebert, John Corey, Stan Weeb, Gary Dirksen, these guys are all still with us. But then, today we've got great people around us who are always available. David Corey, Wendy Forche, Kurt Dirksen, Pratik Singh, Joe Pratap, Matt Tinsley. Like there's people all around us who are just absolute superstars. And all you gotta do is ask them. Say, hey, can you help me with this? Or what do you do here? Or how should I make this happen? And I'm sure the majority of them, if not all of them, would be more than happy to share how it is that they do it. They all have their own systems and checklists. They're gonna look a little bit different, and it's important that you customize things to the way you want it. But that's what I did. I literally just leaned on people around me who were way more experienced.
Okay, so let's jump a little bit here. I want to sort of, I don't know how I would word this. You're going to walk us through the process of how you would deal with some of this stuff. We've had questions with regards to what is it that you're doing we're going to go from firm to possession on a deal. So deal's firmed up, but now we've got the process to possession. So first, we're going to start from the listing agent side, and just starting with how and what you're communicating to your client during that process.
Okay, I want to just so we're talking to a buyer or a seller?
We're talking to you, and you are talking to your seller.
Got it. And we've sold the home, and now, we're firm. And then what are we doing between then and completion?
Possession, yeah.
Okay, possession. Sorry. So the first thing we're doing is figuring out who they want to use as a lawyer or notary. And that conversation oftentimes will start before we actually have a firm and binding contract. That would be something that I would just tend to find a way to bring up in conversation throughout the transaction. More so for client education. Sometimes people have questions about, well, what does a lawyer do? What does a notary do? What's the difference? What's the pros and cons? And so probably we've already talked about that at some point in time, but then the deal goes firm. We need to say, hey guys, need to now make a decision. Who do we want to work with? So that's number one. Also, again, depending on how you operate, this could be relevant or not relevant. But what I like to do is to get to that point, there's probably been a number of documents signed. I'm not talking about the listing documents. I'm talking now stuff pertaining to contracts, right? And so even if the client has retained copies through the series of negotiations or whatever, I like to send them one final email that just says, hey, everybody, here is your fully executed contract of purchase and sale along with, and if there's anything else to be included, right? And then that way, I think from the client experience perspective, they're not having to hunt through multiple emails to find documents. They know that they can just now keep that email or just refer to that email or the PDF in that email, and that's all they'll ever need. And then of course, if in that moment there's a relevant broker or bank that they're working with, I will CC that individual on that email as well, so that person has what they need. And then from that point, depending on, there's some variables here, right? Like, is the closing fast or is it long? And I will say that if there are things to happen, so like let's say I'm repping a seller and we've negotiated in the transaction. I actually just had this happen where in the deal, in this particular transaction, there was two things that needed to occur. The furnace needed to be serviced, and there was some deck railing that had been damaged that needed to be repaired. And it was in the contract of purchase and sale that the seller needed to do that. So that's a tough one, right? You negotiate something and then everyone's happy, the deal's done, and then you go away and everyone forgets about it. So in that moment, what I immediately do is I will go usually, I was going to say 2 or 3 weeks. I lean towards 3 weeks out from completion. And there's a reason I picked 3 weeks. I'll tell you in a second. It goes into my calendar. And you can set it as a reminder or an actual item in your calendar, however you want, whatever makes sense to you. But it pops up 3 weeks out from completion, and it says, so-and-so needs to be reminded that this is an obligation of their contract of purchase and sale. Now, the reason I most often do 3 weeks is because I also have a letter that is what's it called? A boilerplate. I created this letter years ago. I've tweaked it over the years. But it's a letter that goes out to all my buyers and sellers, but it just says, hey, we're 3 weeks from closing. Here's everything that you need to be aware of and on top of if you aren't already. And that actually gets more into things like talking to your insurance company, making sure your insurance dates are all lined up for whatever your needs are there. Utility companies, TELUS, cable, gas, hydro, calling those people in advance, making those changes. And then it's in that letter, if it's relevant to that client, and in this situation it was, that I remind them, hey, you'll recall as part of our contract, you need to have your furnace serviced and have that deck repaired. please confirm that you're on top of this. Let me know if you have any questions. Happy to help in any way you need. And then that goes out 3 weeks in advance. So yeah, I don't know what else I can say to that other than the fact that, there's a lot there, but some of it is dependent on the negotiation as well.
So, and then anything specific you're doing once that seller's given you the lawyer they want to use with regards to the lawyer?
So before that 3-week letter, in between lawyer and 3-week letter?
Correct.
Yes, but it's totally deal dependent. And I would say that in my personal checklist, I don't have a checklist item in that time. I tell people oftentimes, I'll use this language. We'll get the lawyer and we're done and we're kind of now coming down off the mountaintop. And then let's just say we've got 10 weeks between subject removal and closing. It's in that time, I'll say to my clients, hey guys, we've just spoken to each other every day now for the last 14 days. You're probably tired of me and now you get a break. You're not going to hear from me until, and then I reference that 3-week letter. But then I will say to them, you can call me anytime you need if you have any question. But at this point, we're now just in a waiting game and there's nothing else for us to do. So go ahead and, whatever, plan your move, book your movers, all those things. But I'm not in touch with people until that 3-week letter goes out. Of course, there's variables there, right? A question comes up. Like it's totally common where someone's getting insurance lined up on a house. I have this morning that I'm dealing with actually. Somebody goes, well, my insurance company needs these questions answered. Okay, well now obviously I'm in touch with the people again, right? So it's probably rare that we're not talking, but there's nothing planned and systematized from subject removal to that 3-week closing letter.
And then let's jump forward to the day of completion. What's happening for you when you're dealing with your seller?
Dealing with a seller, dealing with a buyer is very different.
Or on the seller?
So with the seller, I find because they're most often going to something new, there's not a whole lot of I'm basically just, in touch with them in the days leading up. So it starts before that. In the days leading up, I'm in touch with them via text or whatever's convenient for them, just saying, hey, I want to confirm the day and time you're going to be out. Now, of course, in that conversation, there's maybe conversations around cleaners. Maybe I've been a part of arranging cleaners. Maybe I haven't. But I'm just confirming exact days and times, not because I need to know, other than the fact that in a lot of cases, as everybody knows, I've got a buyer agent who's on me because maybe they're trying to line stuff up. So I'm trying to get ahead of that so that when I get that inevitable call, I'm able to say, hey, you're getting keys on the exact day and time as per the contract, or possibly, hey, my guys are going to be out early and you can have the keys at this day and time. But then on the actual possession day, it's very rare that I would say it's a relatively insignificant moment for me and my sellers, in that if my seller is going to a new property that I've also sold them, okay, that we'll get to that part. But in terms of giving up the keys, like their lives are in, whatever, it's a zoo. And oftentimes I won't even physically see them. Like I will have gotten one key in advance, or maybe I retained the one that I had. I tell them when they're done, lock yourself out of the house and you go do what you got to do and don't worry about me. And many times I'm not physically seeing them. I've just got that key. I'm waiting to hear from them. And then I'm dealing with the buyer agent as that person's going into the new property. There's some, exceptions to that rule, but I would say more often than not, that's what my seller possession days look like.
On completion days, I guess it's going to be whether seller or buyer, are you in contact with lawyers or are you trying to just wait and get the registration and then deal with it? Or what are you doing?
So good question. So if there is something, I'm in contact with lawyers about weird variables to contracts that could be missed. So one variable could be that the buyer and seller have negotiated something to do with tenancy. And you need to make sure that all the lawyers and everybody's on the same page when it comes to adjusting for either rent or damage deposits or things of that nature. I mean, it's common right now too, is some sellers get an option to rent back and they become a tenant for a period of time. So I'm definitely in touch in the days leading up with that. And that would be via an email where I just lay everything out and say, hey, everyone, reminder, here's what's going on in this contract. Please confirm receipt. And that goes out a few days in advance. No, I don't send it out any earlier than that because you got to remember, especially in this environment, most law offices and notary offices, they're not touching a file until a week in advance anyway, at the earliest, because of how busy they are. So to send it out 3-4 weeks in advance, they'll literally have that email come in and they'll go, I'll deal with that when I get there, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you asked if I'm in touch with the law offices on closing. Only if I feel that I need to be, and I try to leave them alone as much as I can because I know that they're insanely busy just like we are. So I know there's, a hot topic has been, registration numbers and, getting confirmation of closing. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all I can say is that, like, I've had so many of my own situations where, registration occurs at the very end of the day, and everybody's gone home, lawyers check out at 5, maybe our conveyancers are gone at 5, and it's occurred, but the problem is that an email hasn't been sent, or or you phone the office, you can't even get a physical human, it goes to answering service at the law office. So I just kind of chalk that up to, it's a byproduct of the circumstances that we're in, that never occurs in a slow market, because in a slow market, you got a conveyancer dealing with one file in an afternoon. And then, it's really only an issue if you're trying to have possession on the same day as completion. And of course, I avoid that whenever possible for the reasons we just discussed. And if you got possession a day or two later, then generally the very next morning, first thing, is when you're getting that registration letter. My theory is, don't call the law office unless you have to, because if we all are calling them all the time, then they're getting less work done. So, to me, that's just like, if we all adopted that, then they'd probably get stuff done quicker and we'd all wait a little bit less.
Would you check in with them the following day if you didn't get it the day of completion? Like, how long would you wait before you were going to check in with either our conveyancer or them?
Oh yeah. Like if I'm, like if I had a completion that was supposed to happen, like let's say last night was a completion, I didn't get something till 5 o'clock, and I've got possession, let's say today at noon. Well, I'm on them at 9 in the morning. Like, I will have already called because I got possession at noon. But if I got possession tomorrow at 4, then, like, if I got no reason to worry about that deal, right? Like if it's reputable agents on either side, but we know the buyer and seller's case, like there's no reason to worry about it. There's been no smoke of any fire up to this point. Then I know it's coming. It's just that everyone's insanely busy. So I will generally not call. Like if I didn't have possession until the next day at 5, that would not be first on my list this morning at 9 a.m. I would just allow the lawyers to do their jobs, and they're going to, if there's a problem, that's the thing. Like, we got to remember, lawyers and notaries, they don't like to deal with problems. They like to bring agents in to deal with problems. So if there's a problem, you're going to get a call. And if you don't get a call, no news is generally good news, and it just means that everyone's busy, and if you're just patient, the paperwork's going to show up.
So let's jump into the role of the buyer's agent. You're working with a buyer now. We're going again from firm to possession. How is your communicating different with the client and the lawyers, or is it?
So it's slightly different because, the buyer, they're buying, they're not selling. They're, something's happening where down payment funds have to show up at the law office. Now, if that's coming from a sale that you're involved in, that's one thing, right? Because that's pretty straightforward. It's hard to screw that up so long as the sale goes together. If it's not, and it's coming from, whatever, if they're first-time buyers or if they've been renting and they got cash coming, then you definitely, here I think it becomes relevant how engaged you are with whoever is doing their financing. And it doesn't need to be that they're working with, quote unquote, your broker. It doesn't matter who my clients are working with. I'm always directly in communication with whatever bank or broker they're using. And I'm getting in touch with that person very early on in the process because I want that person to see the level and standard under which I operate. I want them to hear very clearly what my expectations are, and then they're going to witness those expectations in my follow through and communication. So that person I'm in touch with, again, on a need to basis. So if it's someone that I know really well and they know what they're doing and they've been around for a long time, then I don't need to check up on them. But if it's I sense a less experienced person or a newer person, then in the week or 2 weeks leading up to completion, I'm shooting them an email saying, hey, just double checking. We got completion on this day. Is everything all good to go? Have mortgage instructions been sent? Where are we at? Give me an update, please. And then in the days leading up to completion, if those funds are coming, if I need to be concerned about where those funds are coming from, or if I have to make sure something doesn't get missed, then yeah, I'm talking to the buyer and I'm saying, hey, just checking in, when are you dropping your deposit funds off at the law office? And again, this isn't happening in every scenario, right? It's buyer dependent, it's broker dependent. I know the lawyer and notary are also doing that. So you kind of got to just, it's like feathering the throttle a little bit. You got to know when to give it gas and know when to back it off. And so, but in a scenario where like if I ever had young mortgage broker, first time buyer, and the first time buyers don't have a mom and dad living around, I am full throttle, full parent mode. Like I'm literally acting as though those people are my kids and I'm in touch with them nearly every day. And I'm talking to them like they're in grade 3 in the kindest way possible. But
Sure.
that's how I'm acting. But if I got whatever, some 65-year-old buyer who's bought and sold 20 properties and they're working with their private banker at Royal Bank or TD, well, we're not talking about these things because they don't need that conversation, right?
Yep. How's your day of completion different with a buyer versus seller, or is it?
Yeah, that's different because, the emotions of buying something new are completely different than the emotions of selling. Not all the time, but most of the time, I think it's more appropriate or expected that you're involved for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, with some situations, a buyer might feel some level of trepidation or fear that, they need to have you there because the property needs to be in the condition that they expected it, or just the practical piece of the fact that generally speaking, the keys are coming from you, right? And so you got to physically get the keys from wherever they're coming from and get them to the buyer. And, you're either, in my case, I mean, I try to see the buyers not at the property. In an ideal situation, and this doesn't happen all the time, but in an ideal situation, I get the keys and I try to get the keys well in advance. The listing, as a listing agent, you can release keys to a buying agent and prior to possession. You can give someone the keys 12 hours before possession, understanding like, hey, you can't go till this time, but here's the keys. And so I will try to get the keys in advance if possible. And then the moment I'm allowed to go into that property, I will go there by myself. And again, this doesn't always work, but if it can work, I like to do it this way. I go there by myself. I run through in 4 minutes because I'm there for a completely different reason than the buyer's going there. And I just want to make sure, is there any kind of a shitstorm I'm about to hit, right? Like, is everything the way it should be? I want to be prepared if it's not. And so that is so different than walking into the home for the first time with a buyer and then getting disappointed without the ability to react or prevent something. So I can't tell you how many scenarios I've had where I go into a property before, I see something, and it's not like cataclysmic, but it's like maybe some garbage was left there, or whatever. Something was not done the way it should have been. Well, I'm on the phone taking care of that before I even get to the buyer with the keys. And then when I'm telling the buyer, hey, you know what? I was just there. Place looks great. You guys are going to love it. One thing they forgot, and even if this isn't the case, I'm covering at this point for the seller. Maybe they left something intentionally. Maybe they were jerks. Maybe they didn't care. But I'm phrasing it in such a way, hey, you know what? This item was forgot, or they overlooked this, but don't even worry about it. I've already got it taken care of. It's going to be dealt with in a few hours or whatever. I've had things where there's damage. Some idiot moves out and they damage drywall on the way out. And I've got a list of people in my life who are my problem solvers. And what I'm communicating to the guys, I'm going, hey, you know what? It looks like there was some damage when they moved out. I got people to take care of that. You guys just go ahead and move in. We'll get this all fixed and cleaned up after your move because you're likely to ding a wall or two at the same time. And then I'll have my guy come in and we'll clean that up for you. So it's just completely different messaging than being surprised at the moment together.
Thing I'm going to bring back is if we go back to completion, and this is both for buyer and a seller. What are you doing when the client of yours wants to know? You've got a client that maybe is nervous. Did the money go through? Did everything actually complete? Is my house actually sold? But you're not getting that registration. What are you saying?
So yeah, okay, I got it. So a little bit of this is dependent on the lawyer and notary that they're using. So, and this is why, like, there's people that I will use and there's people that I won't use. And I mean, not that I have complete control, obviously, but there's some people within the industry where I would just say, like, this is one of the reasons why you don't work with them, because communication's poor and clients get left hanging all the time. Assuming that's not the case, so again, assuming that my clients aren't working with somebody like that, then if we don't get registration and the client feels left in the dark and I can't get any info, then my messaging to the client is like this. If there's a problem, if there's ever a problem where something's going sideways, we get a phone call. If you don't get a phone call, 99 times out of 100, it's because people are busy and we're going to find out in the morning. Nobody ever doesn't call when there's an issue. When there's an issue, you're going to get a call right away. Maybe mortgage funds haven't showed up or they can't clear title properly. The moment any lawyer or notary has an issue, the first thing they're doing before they even call the client is they're calling the real estate agent. So if you haven't gotten a call and your client hasn't gotten a call, and assuming you're not working with an incompetent notary or lawyer, my messaging to the client is, hey, you know what? Relax. I know it can feel unnerving, but people are busy. I'm sure it's fine. If I can get a hold of somebody, I will. But otherwise, let's just chat first thing in the morning and I'll confirm this with you at 9:30 in the morning. And then again, that's where, depending on how quick possession is afterwards, or whether or not those funds are needed for a purchase, and that's a possibility, right? Sometimes there's a purchase the next day and that's what's creating the nerves. But again, in most cases, that lawyer that's handling the sale is also handling the purchase. And it's been my experience with good people in the industry is that if there's an issue, you're getting a phone call. If your phone doesn't ring, that's actually the most beautiful sound. Because if my phone's not ringing, I know there's not a problem.
And then just sort of the last part of this is we talked about dealing with first-time home buyers, and you said you sort of, baby them along, hold their hand. Yeah, do you do a possession the exact same way with a first-time home buyer as you would with anyone else?
No, you got to baby them more, right? I mean, they're babies. So, I've sold lots of properties to people who've moved, client who's moved maybe with me 4 or 5 times, or let's just say not with me 4 or 5 times, and maybe they moved 10 times in their life. It's a far more mechanical experience. These people know what they're doing. It's not as big as of a moment in their life. And so I'm far more likely to step aside on that day with those type of people. Like I feel in some ways I'm in the way if I'm trying to make it about, me and whatever gift I want to bestow on them. Step aside, everybody. The real estate agent's here. I don't quite do it that way. And that's not to say that, it can't be Pamela Studenberg has an incredible, system and plan that she does. Her and Natalie are and Christian as well. They're unbelievable with what they do with their clients. And if anyone wants to hear about that, I think that's probably 4 or 5 episodes ago now on the podcast. But I haven't made a habit of doing that with my experienced buyers. I'm usually get the keys in their hand. I like to let them go to the property on their own because, again, in my ideal scenario, I've already been to the property, so I don't need to see it. And I want to give them their space there. And then when it comes to follow up and actually if there is a housewarming gift or something like that, that in my plan is actually happening a few days later. I feel like a moving day is a bit of a shit show. It's messy and dirty and hectic. I want to give people their space to be in that. And then I want to come back in the days following when most real estate agents have disappeared. And I want to leave them with a lasting impression of, thanking them and giving them whatever I want to give them. And now, we're in a space where we can actually have a bit of a conversation because it's not their moving day and they're not totally stressed. But with back to your original question of new buyers. Yeah, I'm probably physically at the property with them when they're, you're taking them over the threshold and holding their hand. And, new buyers oftentimes are buying strata. Strata's way more high maintenance. We didn't get into that. I can certainly do that. But with strata, you have to figure out elevator keys, move in, move out process. Every strata usually puts pads up in their elevator, where you're allowed to park your moving truck, figuring out utilities with these stratas can sometimes be a bit weird because a lot of these new stratas have some of the utilities included. Like you could be with Shaw or with TELUS for free in your strata fee in any new buildings. So specific to that, if I've got a deal like that, then whether or not it's a new buyer, that's just an added thing that goes into the process of, remember I talked about that 3-week utility letter that goes out. If that's the flag where if we've got a building where some of these variables are there, then I'm helping the buyer work through some of that. But that's also the time for the buyer to start taking responsibility because they're going to be living in this building. And in the strata documentation, they've got the contact info for, president and manage, whatever the management company is. And at that time, they need to be emailing and calling and saying, hey, we're moving in on such and such a date. What do we need to know? So I'm not doing that for them unless it's absolutely necessary for me to get involved. I'm more just directing them and saying, here's who you need to call. Here's the way this is going to go. And you got 3 weeks to make it happen.
All right, you ready to jump to the next topic?
Yeah, totally. Let me.
We're doing another. We're going to do another buyer agent, listing agent scenario.
Okay.
Multiple offers are obviously still the name of the game right now. Everything, for the most part, tends to be going multiple. So I want you to walk through the process of how you handle the negotiations in a multiple offer scenario from a buyer's side and then from the seller side.
Oh boy, we got.
Yeah, big one.
You got 45 more minutes. This is going to get.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's going to get deep.
Your card's clear this time, so.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I don't have the recording stuff. Okay, do you want to start with buyer or seller?
Yeah, let's start with the buyer side.
Okay, so I'm assuming we're going to assume that we're in a multiple offer situation, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I think it's really important. So I don't want to. Well, we can get into this however much you want, but education of the buyer is really huge. I think in it plays an important role in helping your buyer succeed. And by succeed, what we oftentimes mean is paying more than anybody else, right? Like, let's be honest, that's what it often is. So you could say in winning, perhaps they're even losing, depending on who you ask. But if you can't get the buyer in a place where they're prepared to pay the most, then you're just wasting their time and wasting your time and bringing everybody through a lot of emotional turmoil. So how do you do that? Well, depending on what you're looking at, you need to help the buyer see what the value of the property was yesterday. And by yesterday, I mean maybe 3 months ago. What the value of a property like that is worth today. And then what the likelihood is of a sale number reflecting today's value or tomorrow's value. And you can do this through a story, right? So in this trajectory of this market that we've been in, where every new sale tends to be a new benchmark, it clearly then isn't a winning plan to pay the exact amount of money that the last similar property sold for, because that hasn't been the plan, or that hasn't been the trajectory. The trajectory's always been more. And that's where a lot of people, I think, end up in losing frustration, is that they go, well, that home just sold for 1.12. And so we offered the neighbor 1.12 and the neighbor ends up selling for 1.2 or 1.175. So you've got to show the buyer that that's been the pattern in the previous months, so that they understand that when their moment comes to buy something, and we know the last comparable sale is 112 of what they're trying to buy. When we look at the data, we say, hey guys, on average, how are these sales bumping up every time? Are they bumping up 2%, 3%, 4%? And then taking that data, we use that to formulate the number that we offer on that property. So does that make sense?
Yep.
That's one thing. So I would say that's the mental preparation side, getting the buyer in a place mentally where they're actually suited to aggressively compete. And if you can get them there and they're there, the rest is actually, I don't want to say it's easy, but the rest is a lot easier. Because if you're in a scenario where you're competing, where you're constantly in the middle of the pack, well, convincing a listing agent to give you another opportunity or work with you or whatever is very, very difficult when you're number 5 out of 9 offers or 10 offers. But if you come in and you're consistently either number 1 or 2 or 3, then your odds of getting what you want are going to be that much greater. And then of course, there's issues of dates and subjects and things of that nature. But statistically, I'd love to know this. There's no way to probably track this, but I'd love to know what percentage of the time an offer wins when it wasn't one of the top 3 offers in terms of the number on the page to begin with.
Right.
And I would be willing to bet that it's like less than 1% of the time. If you're not in the top, you don't always have to be the number 1, but you've got to be top 3. You've got to be top 3 because we've all been there representing the seller. You got 10 offers in front of you. You're not looking at the 6th highest offer. I mean, you're looking at it, but you're not really looking at it. You're focusing on the higher ones and trying to figure out with those higher ones, is there a way you can leverage the scenario to get the amount of money you're happy with and to maybe get a subject-free offer or exactly the dates you want or whatever. So all that to say, mental preparation with the buyer, showing them the trajectory of the market, helping them understand that offering what the last comparable sale was is generally not enough. And if they understand and believe that and are prepared to do that, I think you've won a significant amount of the battle. And then from that point on, now you're walking around with what's going to be a great offer whenever you write it. And now it's about leveraging relationships, staying in touch with the listing agent, helping that person see that, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Listing Agent, not only am I going to bring you an incredible offer, my guys are overqualified. It's going to be one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest offer you have. And you know that you're not going to have an issue with me because I'm amazing or I'm a great guy to work with or blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
As much flexibility as possible is obviously great. And then the other thing is I want to give credit. Somebody in our brokerage said this. It was one of our younger guys, actually. I want to say it was either Bray Schulte or it's not gonna come to my head right now. But one of the younger agents in our office said that they are borderline irritating to the listing agent. Like they're in touch with the listing agent all the time, constantly. It was Sheldon Clausen. I think that's who it was. Sheldon Clausen. Also happened to be Rookie of the Year last year, so that says something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he said that like, hey, like I want to be the guy that I don't want to piss the person off, but I want to be in their ear constantly because, squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I can say that I've been in that scenario as a listing agent with somebody who's on me way more than anybody else. And you know what? I can't help but favor them because then when you're sitting in front of your sellers and you're trying to pick out of the massive pile and say, well, who's the best? At the very least, even if that offer is not the highest, I can say to the sellers, guys, I mean, I can tell you that based on the real estate agent, these people are insanely motivated because he's called me 11 times in the last 48 hours and he keeps telling me that they'll do anything they have to get your property. So we should probably put them towards the top of the pile.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you've got someone that motivated, then if it makes sense, you're going to probably give them an opportunity that maybe they otherwise would not have received. So I think being a squeaky wheel and riding that listing agent hard can make a difference too.
So for yourself, working from the buyer's side, what is your communication like with that listing agent? Are you talking to them 11 times?
Like if I'm repping the buyer?
Yep.
Oh yeah. Like I'm in touch with that individual a significant amount. Like, this is where, personality and your own personal experience come into play. But, if I'm talking to another agent with whom I've got lots of history or, let's say we've done a lot of deals together, I'll say to them, hey, why don't we know we're doing a deal together. Just tell me when you want to have everything papered and I'll get it exactly the way you need it. And we'll high five when this is all done and away we go. Like I'm assuming in conversation that we're doing a deal.
Right.
And then when offer day comes, I'm in touch with that agent as much as I need to be. Like, I know what the program is. I know what the timing is. I know roughly maybe how many offers there are, whether or not it's 5 or 10. I'm not sure that makes a difference. I know some people think it does, but I don't necessarily think it does. I've got my buyers prepped exactly the way we need to be. And then the messaging to the agent is, hey, I think I've brought you whatever anyone could bring you. I think I've got you here, right? Like, and I'm assuming that that's the case. I'm hoping that I'm not walking around with buyers that aren't equipped to win. But again, assuming I am, then the number shouldn't be an issue. We should be in range. we've done everything we can in advance. Maybe we pre-inspected the home, maybe we reviewed strata documents in advance, but if it's not a subject-free offer, it's going to be darn close, within reason. There's properties that we shouldn't be doing that on. And if I've got my people really prepped, then we can do whatever dates, and sometimes we can even do a rent back, where we're willing to complete on such and such a date, and maybe the sellers can live there for a month or two if they need to. So, I'm trying to create a scenario where the sellers, unless there's another buyer that's exactly like us, they can't really say no to us, even if we aren't the highest offer, because our terms are more likely, hopefully, better than everybody else's terms. And then even if there's an offer or two that's higher, because our terms are so good, maybe, just maybe, we get a call that says, hey, we love you guys, we love your motivation, your terms are great, you can have it if you're willing to pay this or that. So yeah, that's how I'm generally trying to position my people, and I would say my success rate is quite high.
So let's jump now into the other seat. Now you're working for the sellers, listing agent.
Yep.
What's your process through multiple offers?
So it starts back. So when we, the communication around how this is going to go and what the day is going to look like starts, before we're even going to market, right? When we're talking about the marketing plan and how we're going to do it, obviously you got to get direction of offer signed, assuming you're going down that path. And I would say the majority of the time I do, but there's some times where I still haven't, where I've gone to market to feel out how things are. And then maybe 24 or 48 hours in, we sign a direction of offers if need be. But assuming we're at that place and, we've picked a day, then I'm telling my sellers to clear their schedule to the tune of roughly 3 hours, whatever that day is, whenever we've decided. I don't know why people do evenings. I know people will say, well, I got a shift worker or this person works during the day. There's extreme situations, but as much as possible, I want it to be middle of the day when people are awake and brokers are available and lawyers are available and the whole world is open for a conversation, should there need to be a conversation before we execute a contract. So I'm usually in, working hours. It's all part of the plan. And then when that day comes, I've got my people prepped, waiting, and, depending on the circumstance in the last year and a half, maybe I'm going to see them, maybe I'm just doing it over Zoom, but they're well prepared for what could take hours, and whether or not we get 3 offers or 15 offers. It just, you don't know, but you deal with what you got when you got it.
How much information are you giving? Because obviously agents are going to be bugging you. They want to know how many offers, all the details they can get from you. What are you giving to them usually?
Totally. Good question. So I understand some people need that. I don't think it makes a difference whether there's 5 offers or 10 offers personally. I shouldn't say that. It can make a difference. So I'm trying to give people as much info as I can without it turning into a scenario where, I can't get any of their work done because people are just on me 24/7. So I will send out messages via our, touch-based system to everybody involved saying, hey, reminder offers are tomorrow. And then when I've received an offer, I'll oftentimes send out a message saying 1 in hand, expecting, and, somewhere between 4 and 8. And then usually 15 minutes to 30 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever before deadline, I'll then send out another one that says, hey, I got 6 in hand, you got 20 more minutes, and all the while people are texting me, calling me, whatever. And
sure,
I'm doing whatever I can to be as helpful as possible. There are some times where I've just said to people like, listen, I don't know because nobody tells me. And whether or not there's 8 or 12, I'm not sure that it matters at this point. So just send me your offer, and I can't feel comfortable telling you what number we're at because nobody's giving me exact information as to whether or not they're going to be sending one. So your guess is as good as mine.
How are you prepping? You talked about prepping buyers when they're going into multiples. What's your direction for sellers? Like, obviously a seller wants the most amount of money, but are you also putting value to some of the other things that could come in that contract with regards to terms and dates and all that kind of stuff? Or are you doing that in the moment?
Well, so through, again, the education process, we'll end up talking about this leading up to it, where sellers will say, like, so how does this work? Is this like, do we just sign? Like, a common question is do we just take the highest one and sign it? And I say, absolutely not.
Right.
No, we don't. We might. It's possible that an offer will come in that is so much better than everybody else in every way that there's no point in having any conversation with anyone else. That's possible. I would say, though, that happens, I don't know, 15, 20% of the time at most. And generally speaking, there is a group of people who are all good in varying degrees or for various reasons. Price, terms, dates, flexibility, maybe strength of buyer agent, which is another thing we have not discussed, which I think is very, very important. So how I have that conversation when I'm sitting in front of the clients is like this. I will have reviewed all the offers prior to sitting with them. I am never, ever, ever looking at paperwork for the first time with the clients present.
Sure.
So if I'm going to their house, I've reviewed them all in advance. If I'm talking to them over Zoom, I've reviewed them all in advance. Then I've already shortlisted what I think should be shortlisted leading into the conversation. And this is obviously more relevant when you got 13 offers than when you got 3. If you got 3, you're maybe not doing that. But if you got 13, you are, because with 13 offers, sometimes you can have a $150,000 spread and there's just a huge difference, right? So I take what I think needs to be on the top of the pile. And then when I meet with the client, I say, hey guys, I do the whole whatever, got good news, this many offers. And then I tell them right off the bat, of the 13 offers we have, I've pulled them apart in a couple different categories. In this category over here, we have this range of value, and maybe these are all the offers with subjects. In this category over here, we've got 4 offers that are all subject free, and here's the range of value. Now, I need to present to you all of these offers, but I want to first draw your attention to the A pile. We're going to go over the A pile in detail. And then after that, we're going to skim the B pile. But if you have any questions about either one, we'll dig into them. And then if you feel we need to switch any of these back and forth and change the pile they're in, we can do that too. But there's a reason why I'm calling these the B pile and these the A pile. And then it's in that discussion and question process that we're flushing out things like, well, Andrew, why is this an A pile? Well, this person's here because maybe it wasn't a subject free offer, but it's our highest offer. And I feel really good about the buyer and the agent. So they're in the A pile. And then someone could say, well, why did you put, this one? This one's subject free, but it's in the B pile. Well, it's subject free, but it's in the B pile because it's $110,000 lower than, these other ones in the A pile. So we can move it to the A pile if you want, but for now I put it in the B pile. So that's kind of how I frame the conversation. And the goal is I say to all my clients is I want to end up with a grouping of offers that we can leverage the situation for to get the most. And maybe that's 2 offers and maybe that's 5 offers. And when I say the most, it's not necessarily always price. Oftentimes it can be flexibility, dates, terms. And I've had a number of times in the last year or so where the seller has left some money on the ground, or on the table, I should say, and they've chosen a buyer for maybe emotional reasons. Maybe a nice letter came along with kids and they wanted a family in there instead of an investor, and they left a few bucks on the table. I just repped a buyer in a purchase where the purchase price was 2.2 million. So this is me repping the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another offer on the table for 2.4 million. And the sellers left $200,000 on the table because the property had been in the family for 38 years. And they loved that what my buyers were going to do with the property, what their intent was. And the money didn't matter really to them anymore. And they just wanted to know that the property was going to somebody that they thought it should. So they left $200,000 on the table. That negotiation happened last week.
Was that because of a letter, or how did they know?
So, yeah, good question. We did a letter, but more importantly than the letter, we had the buyer meet the seller, which was intentional on our part because we knew that this property had a lot of interest. Mm-hmm. And we knew that we felt strongly that the seller would like the buyer and their family and what they were going to do. And so there was a time when we went for a showing and the listing agent said, hey, you know what, you can do that, but the seller can't leave. And I said, oh, hey, no problem. I said, in fact, that's great if they meet, because I think your seller would like to meet my clients and hear about, what they're going to do. Like this is a large acreage that's been in the family for years. And so that was the ticket. They hung out for probably, I'm going to say, an hour and a half. I wasn't even there for most of it. And from that moment, the seller had decided that they wanted my clients to have the property.
And then, so in that process where you were talking about speaking with your seller and going over the contracts, how often are you reaching out to the buyer's agents to give them a chance to adjust?
So we'll zero in on our, the top contenders that we want to be in conversation with. And
Hmm.
how often are people getting a call? Well, if I had to say on a percentage basis, I would say in 90% of my negotiations, at least uh, at least a few people are getting a call. That's not to say everybody who wrote an offer gets a call, but
Right.
at least a few people are getting a call. So I would say it's quite high, but it's not, that opportunity is not given to everybody.
Hmm.
And I put a lot of significance on what we know about the buyer and their finances and their intent for the property, and also what we know about the agent and their experience, track record, and my knowledge of their history. That to me is huge. And I share that with my sellers. I talk to them about that. And my sellers go, absolutely. Like, if we got 3 offers in hand and 2 of them are from unknown entities where we have limited information, and one of them is from a high level or reputable agent, let's say in our office, or even if it's not our office, but another agent that I know well, that I've done a lot of deals with, but particularly if it's in our office, I mean, there's a high level of probability that that person is getting an opportunity that the other 2 might not even get, because experience and history mean a lot. Now, that person might not do what we want them to do, and we might not end up doing that deal, but they're going to get an opportunity that they otherwise may not have gotten, purely based on the skill level and ability of the agent and or the knowledge we have about the buyer.
Right. All right. I'm going to jump to the next question because I feel like handling negotiations and multiples could be a whole training on its own.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So the question was, what's been your experience? We're talking about marketing and sort of target farming areas.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been your experience with what's been successful when marketing to a farm or a target area with regards to listings, solds, promotional? I don't know exactly what you do, but what have you found has been successful in that type of marketing?
A number of things. So the first mistake that people make is or I don't want to phrase it that way. The thing to be most concerned about when you're starting is, what neighborhood are you picking? Why are you picking it? And how many doors are in that neighborhood? So obviously this question changes as well versus like for how urban your neighborhood is. So if you're working a lot in a city core, then your farm is probably going to have a ton of strata, if not all strata. And then how you do that changes a little bit as well. For the purpose of the question, I think I'll talk about detached because, we live in suburbia for the most part in the Fraser Valley. Like there's just, it's more relevant. I think it's easier to do, and it's also more lucrative because you're talking about, generally speaking, higher value properties, which can create higher gross revenue. So on that topic, mistake people make is they don't analyze the neighborhood. They don't have a clear sense of like, okay, well, they just go, well, there's 800 homes. Well, what are they? Is it all single family detached? Is it townhomes? Is it condos? Of those properties, how many of them are rental? If you pick a neighborhood where it's too high a concentration of rental, and this is where it can become a real challenge with stratas, especially newer buildings. If you're talking to 800 doors, but 205 of them are tenants, well, you're wasting 25% of your communication and your dollars because you're not even talking to the homeowner every time you do something. So I like to suggest that you want to be below 1,000 homes for sure. In any neighborhood I ever farmed, and I've done a few, I was never higher than 800, and the sweet spot that I liked was actually about 500 or 600, which sounds small, and it is small in comparison to some of the larger farming platforms that you hear about. But you got to remember, every time you do something in a neighborhood, every door costs you an amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can feel like, you should do more, but I like the idea of doing less and with a higher potency and higher efficiency rate because it's easier to get going. It's cheaper to do 500 doors than 1,000 doors or 2,000 doors when you're starting. And you can always scale it up. Like if you start with 500 doors, And I'll just throw out some generic stats, but like generically speaking, you'll see roughly 5% turnover. And that's neighborhoods vary, but you'll see 5% turnover. So in 500, you're gonna have 25 listings come on the market in that neighborhood in a 12-month cycle. So if you can get like a really low number to try to get is 10%. Okay, so now you got 2.5 listings in a year. 2.5 listings might have turned into, let's call it $45,000, or call it, let's say $50,000 of revenue, right? It's not an extremely expensive neighborhood. Well, $50,000 of revenue, I can tell you, to market successfully to 500 homes, you do not need a budget bigger than about $2,500 or $3,000 to farm that. I mean, okay, I'm maybe let's be a little bit more generous. Let's say $4,500 to $5,000 to farm that neighborhood, and that's being generous. So if you get to that point, and then you go, well, I'm amazing at this, I want to scale it up. Well, then fine, then scale it up. But don't start at 1,500 homes, because what happens is with any neighborhood is you've got to understand that you're probably going to go at minimum 6 months, if not 10 to 12 months before you see any return.
Right.
Well, I'd rather be spending on 500 homes than on 1,500 or 2,000 homes, not getting a return for 6 to 12 months. So start small, understand the metrics of your neighborhood, look at the average price point, do the math on what the average commission is, what kind of revenue you're likely to generate. And then when you're actually picking your plan, you got to think about all the different variables of how you can communicate to a neighborhood. Now, the major ones that come up are, bus benches, some type of flyer or advertising through the mail or to the door. And then people do geographic stuff as well with, ads on Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. And then you also can do neighborhood parties. Like I've done, again, this is pre-COVID world, but in the neighborhood, I've done like neighborhood barbecues at the local park where, you're just, you're renting a bouncy castle, you're essentially running an open house at a park with a bouncy castle and a barbecue for a Saturday afternoon. And, you're doing that once or twice a year. And all of the combination of these things are what create the touches over time. And then that's what can take you from, at first 7, 8, 9, 10% market share to, there's examples of agents in our market around us that have upwards of 25% market share in neighborhoods. The highest I ever got to was there was a time where I had 25, but I was more around 20% market share in a neighborhood. And I had that for a number of years. So the other thing I'm a big fan of, which again was challenging throughout COVID, but door-to-door delivery versus mail delivery of your flyers that you are doing, whether they're just listed, just sold, or just other marketing pieces. When you are in the mail, you're just a part of the noise that's there. There's a ton of junk mail, and it's just easy to get lost. The cost to do door-to-door delivery is, while there's a little bit more management to it, and yeah, you got to get the right person, and you got to make sure that they're not running across yards, and there's a bit more work for sure. But the actual cost was no different than sending stuff through the mail because of how expensive mail has gotten. I was paying somebody $20 an hour, and they were able to do roughly 100 homes an hour. And so I was getting a 500 home drop done for $100. And there was times where it was $120 on delivery. Well, if you do the math on sending out 600 pieces or 1,000 pieces, I guarantee you're going to come to roughly a very, very similar cost. And the difference is I found that my responses were so much better because when you're at the door, there's just a greater likelihood that when whoever picks it up, that's the only item they're picking it up. Even if they are walking directly to the trash can or recycling bin with your item, there's still it's a longer period of time it's in their hand. And then what happens is they get used to seeing your stuff at their door because you're the only person who's landing at their door in that way. And you can have a lot of fun with those pieces too. Like I recently shared some of my pieces with Dave Bawa because Dave's going to be starting a neighborhood in Langley. I gave him some of the stuff that I did, and I think he looked at it and he said, he goes, man, that's cool. I've never seen that before, or that's a great idea. And you got to be creative with your design And then you can hopefully ensure that that item is in that individual's hand a little bit longer. Maybe it gets stuck on the counter. Heck, maybe it even gets magnetized to the fridge would be ideal. But I just found my response rate door to door was just unbelievably better than anything I ever did in the mail.
Was there any particular piece of marketing or thing that you tried that didn't work? Or you just thought like this wasn't worth it, or maybe I didn't get as good of what I was expecting?
Well, I talked about the neighborhood barbecue thing. I don't actually know if that did anything. Like, it's hard to measure something like that. I know a lot of people had some free food and whatever, and maybe it did. That's kind of that was something that maybe I didn't do consistently enough. You probably have to do that over regularly over a period of time. So I don't know what that did. I think that being top of mind for people in a neighborhood, if you can get some general branding of your mugshot on a particular bus bench, as much as, we can laugh about bus benches, we can say, well, what do bus benches do? They're old or whatever. I'm on, yet this has happened this last week. So I'm driving with my kids in the car. We're heading out of town. We're going to the interior for the weekend. This is just when I was away this last weekend. And I'm working on something with Joe Pratap, and Joe calls me, and it comes over the speakerphone in the car. And so on the call display, my youngest daughter sees Joe Pratap. She loses her mind and starts giggling. While I'm talking to Joe, she's like excited beyond control, to the point where she and my wife end up interrupting the call because my wife ends up telling Joe how excited that Ebony is that she's talking to the celebrity Joe Pratap, because this is the guy that Ebony sees in our neighborhood every time we drive around our neighborhood. So as much as we can knock bus benches, if you have that kind of impact on a 9-year-old child, then you got to know that those are doing something for brand, name, and face awareness. And so it was a good reminder. I think they're very valuable in neighborhoods that you want to farm, because every time somebody drives around, we just don't know subconsciously how much that information is going into a human's mind. And the evidence is in my little 9-year-old who thought, 10 now, she's recently turned 10, who thinks that she's talking to the celebrity Joe Pratap. So I think that there's a lot of value in having those, and then doing obviously regular door-to-door and or mailer drops of just listed, just sold, maybe, current events within the community. And then I like what I call, I don't like the word generic, but I've always referenced them as generic marketing pieces. I think it's important to send pieces out that aren't referencing a particular property, but they're more just something substantial that's eye-catching, that's propping your brand and making people think. And so an example of one was one that I did where I made this piece to resemble an iPhone. And so just imagine something that's roughly 6x9, but it's actually shaped and looks identical to the screen of an iPhone. And it's a text conversation. And the text conversation was actually a conversation between me and a client that I made up, but it was still drawing upon real conversations of me and a client. And the specifics of the conversation was that it was dealing with something challenging in a negotiation. And then the flip side of the piece was something to the effect of, for your next move, make sure you hire an agent that can handle all the tough negotiations or tough conversations or something like that. And so, was that the world's greatest marketing idea? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that nobody, or at least in that neighborhood, had ever seen a paper iPhone land on their door with an actual text conversation. It looked like a phone. And so they picked it up. They're like, what's this? And that piece was very impactful. Like, it was 2 or 3 calls that I immediately got off of that. And I believe it was 2 listings that turned into. And then I did another one that, again, it's not a just listed or just sold, but it was following the same idea. It was a stainless steel double door fridge. That's what the piece actually looked like. And then on the fridge, and keep in mind on that iPhone, like my face was not on the front of that. It was just an iPhone text conversation. All of the marketing stuff was on the back. And then when you get it dropped off, you leave it with that side up, right? Like that iPhone side up. And then this one with the fridge, just imagine a beautiful stainless steel fridge, and it had sticky notes attached to it. And this one went out around New Year's. And the sticky notes were typical New Year's resolutions, right? Run a triathlon, eat better, lose weight, invest in blah, blah, blah. There was like 10 different typical things that I just, ideas I pulled offline, and they were all these yellow sticky notes on the fridge. And then one of those things was sell a home. I think the other one was buy an investment property. And then on the back of the card was, again, my marketing along the bottom, but it said something to the effect of, whatever you resolve to do in 2020, do it with something to the effect of that you know and trust, right? And so again, it was just a really catchy piece that I think people hadn't seen before. And because it stuck around in their house a little bit longer, maybe, or didn't get thrown in the trash right away, it led to some immediate response.
You made a comment when you were talking about the iPhone 1 of the response that somebody would get, which is what's this? Which I think really should be the goal of when you're putting something like that together, because that is your chance to stand out versus the garbage that's in mail.
Totally. It's just, can I make this piece survive a little bit longer than the average? That's honestly what it is.
Yep.
And if that means like paint it hot pink with a rainbow on it, like that would work. I did a few where the card, like I say card, like the piece, I did a lot of 6x9s, but the front was literally plain white. And then there would be a word on the front middle, and it was a word that I would bet 99.9% of people had never heard of in the English language. And so to do this, I would actually like spend hours on my phone at night looking for words that I really liked. One of them was, one that pops to mind right now was vicissitude. I'll even, I got to remember the spelling. I'll type it in right now as I'm doing it. Vicissitude. And it was something about a change. Here we go. A change of circumstances or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or pleasant. So I would have this word and then the definition, and it was just on this white stock paper, and like it looked very strange, right? It's just sitting on someone's doorstep, and like, what is that? So they pick it up, and then of course they flip it over, and then they see it's from me, and then there was a comment about the changing circumstances of the market and being aligned with people who can help you traverse, uncharted territory, uncharted waters, or something like that. And so I did a series of these ones where it was just words on white paper with definitions. And I just think the lifespan in the home was that much longer than some other generic just listed stuff. And that's what led to the returns.
All right, I'm gonna skip here real quick. I'm gonna put you sort of through the paces here for this last one because we won't be able to cover it in full. But I am going to quickly preface it with the fact that if you are a RE/MAX Little Oak agent, we have an internal training session coming up on October 20th with Dan Lang regarding dealing with tenancies. But I wanted to ask you, and one of the questions that came up was, how are you dealing with tenancies when you're the listing agent?
Yeah, so that's different in my mind than if it's a tenant in the home that the sellers are living in versus just a revenue property that the seller does not live in.
Let's go with the seller does not live in.
Okay, so that is, I've had a lot. I actually had one client in the past 12 months. I sold this guy over the course, so from 2013 to 15, or it might have been 12 to 14, he bought 5 properties in 2 years, and he just sold them all in the last year. So he did incredibly well. He made 7 figures. Whatever, decided he wanted to sell them all. So in each case, they were all but one. One of them had been conveniently vacated. All the other ones this year were not. They were tenanted. And so how that worked was when he said he wanted to sell it, he would go to the tenant and explain to them that he's going to sell. So he would be the first point of contact. And then at that time say, hey, you know what? My agent is going to be in touch to discuss the process and what this looks like and answer any of your questions and blah, blah, blah. So he would kind of make the intro. Then I would reach out to the tenant. And in that phone call was not, hey, we're going to market and here's how this is going to look. I set it up in such a way where, I instructed the seller to make the intro about me. And then I told the seller when I made the call, that was going to be me feeling out how I think this is going to go best.
Sure.
So then in that conversation with the tenant, of course, they're like, sometimes I did it face to face, sometimes I did it over the phone. And, imagine like this is not a fun conversation for these people in most cases, right? So they had a lot of questions, and I'm seeing this as my ability to build rapport and trust. I'm not answering specifics because my messaging at that time is like, hey guys, we actually haven't made the final determination as to when this is going to occur. We haven't picked a day. And so, we're going to, and I promise you, we're going to give you that info as soon as we can. But what I'd like to hear from you is, because this could impact our decision making, is like, how does this work for your life? What does this look like? Tell me about your lives, your schedules, your kids. Hypothetically, if we were to go to market, what would be inconvenient times, convenient times? Would you like me to try to do this over a 4-day period where maybe you leave for a few days? Or is that impossible? I'm gathering information. And then based on that interaction, I'm going back to my client. I'm saying, listen, dude, like either these guys aren't going to be able to get this thing looking great, or they are, or maybe we can send them away for a nice weekend. And we did that with one family. We put them up in a hotel, and they went away to it was Harrison Hot Springs actually. So gathering information, then go back once we have all the information in hand, talk with the client again, strategize about the pros and cons of the different options, what makes sense in a pricing strategy. Is there any point in having a cleaner come in or help people with cleanliness or staging or anything like that? And again, it all depends on the tenant, right? Some tenants live in properties like they care for them like they're their own. That's a completely
Sure.
different scenario than if the place is a total dump, right? So gathering info, going back, creating strategy with the seller once we have all the information we need, and then phoning the tenant back. And when you call the tenant back or meet with the tenant for the second time, it's, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the timeline. Here's the exact dates. Like we've chosen everything at this point. There's when we're starting advertising. Here's when we're going to market. And if there is going to be some type of an offering, that's the moment when we say, hey, we're going to market this week. Could we, help you guys get a place for a couple nights so that we're not disrupting your life as much? And if there was a more convenient weekend for the tenant than another, then I would have found out that information in the first convo, right? Oftentimes that's not a possibility. Oftentimes it's, people's lives are busy. They can't just up and go away. But if there's anything we can do to help them, gift cards for, restaurants while they're going to be out, all that kind of stuff, I am prepping my seller from the get-go that is part and parcel with selling a tenant-occupied property. And there's going to be some cost attached to making the tenant's life more comfortable. Because in the end, that's going to lead to an easier showing and selling process, which is going to impact the bottom line.
What are you doing with a tenant that wants to know details with regards to what are the rules? How long do I get? What's the,
Totally.
Are you giving them details or are you pointing them to somebody else?
Well, I'm telling them there's always a disclaimer, right? I'm saying, hey, I can speak to them. I can say, hey, I've been in this business for nearly 20 years. I own my own rental property. I think I know the Residential Tenancy Act pretty much inside and out. So I'm happy to answer all of your questions I can from my perspective, but then give them the disclaimer, hey, here's the number. Feel free to reach out to these people. They're going to do that anyway, right?
Sure.
Like they're going to. So, and just as a comment, like I am never, the moment a tenant sniffs that you're trying to do something that's on the wrong side of the law, you're dead in the water. Like all trust is gone. So just, I say that to say that I am always on the safe side of the line. I'm always want to be the one to tell the tenant all their rights because then I feel like that's all part of the building trust and rapport process. Yeah. So like I want to always know more than they know because then, I feel like in that environment, there's just more trust I guess is the best way to put it.
Yep. And then just on the other side, then what are you saying to your buyers if they're looking at tenanted properties?
Well, again, I mean, from that perspective, then I'm talking. Then
I guess actually it's a little tough. Let's switch that up and say you're looking at tenanted properties with the assumption that this person is not an investor. Your buyer is not.
Yeah.
An investor.
So like we're going to be kicking a tenant out when we buy
Correct.
the property. Yeah. So then we got to be extremely clear on a few things. When we go through the property, we're taking in like what type of person is this tenant? Are they taking care of the home? Do we sense that they're going to be disgruntled? We're trying to pick up on any cues about that because that could impact the level of risk to the buyer. right? And so by risk, I mean maybe a tenant gets pissed off and they damage a property on their way out. And you could say, well, contractually, then the seller's obligated to deal with it, which is true, but it's still a pain in the ass, right? Like if that happens.
Totally.
And then the other piece is just understanding very clearly when, the risks of, the giving of the notice process and what that looks like, the risks of completing on the property and inheriting that tenant, even if that tenant has been given notice, versus waiting for the tenant to have vacated and then completing. And there is a difference between the two.
Do you have a preference? Would you recommend one over the other to your buyer?
Sure. I mean, if it doesn't make a difference to the buyer, then I would say wait until the tenant's moved out.
Right.
Because what you're taking on, and even though the risk is small, and in some cases, like if the tenant lives like a church mouse and they take great care of the place or whatever, obviously you're going to feel differently than if they don't, right? But if we're just talking about risk mitigation, then, and you didn't have to have it, then why wouldn't you just wait until the tenant moves out? But in this environment that we've been in, that's very competitive and it's hard to get properties. I mean, obviously, we don't always have these luxuries. And sometimes, it's been the opposite. Buyers have taken on far more risk than they otherwise would have in other circumstances. And they don't have a choice. So again, that's not to say that's bad, but it's important that you show a buyer the added risk that they're taking on in doing something like that versus waiting for the tenant to move out. And my experience with people is that humans don't mind risk. What they don't like is risk that they weren't told about. So, everybody's allowed to make their own choices. And I think most people will take on a reasonable amount of risk. And most people, even if told the risk of taking on a tenant in this environment, they'll take the tenant on because that's the way to get the property. But if this conversation wasn't had and you didn't lay it out in such a way, they can lead to problems, down the road when something does go sideways, if you haven't talked to them about those risks.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So for Remax Little Oak agents, if you're interested in more, make sure you go on to the Wants and Haves. Dan Lang, October 20th, we're going to be doing a whole session just solely on dealing with tenancies. Plus, he's got awesome stories.
Oh, Dan has, I've known Dan for, I don't know, my entire time I've been licensed. I think he got into the business a year or two before me. I think it was 2001 or thereabouts. I'm 2003. He's the only property manager I've ever used. I think he's managed properties for me for years, and he manages properties for a number of my clients. He is my first call. When I have a tenancy issue or problem, he's great at picking up or returning calls if he's busy, and he knows everything there is to know. And he's an incredible resource that we have right in our own backyard.
Yep, it's going to be good. All right, man, we hit them all.
Woo,
we did it.
That was good. Minute or hour, almost good. An hour and a half. That was great. Those are some great questions. I hope that people find that to be valuable. I think they will. And I think those questions were all really relevant for today's,
today's
market. Yeah. So that was.
Yep.
That was.
Thanks for taking some time.
Excellent. My pleasure. Thanks for filling in the my usual chair.
Your shoes for a day. That's right.
Yeah. I like to. This is cool. I like doing this every now and then. I think hopefully it's a benefit, and I certainly enjoy it.
Perfect. All right, man. Have a good rest of your day.
See ya.